right.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about this book, which I think is reversed, but it's at least is on my screen, but Lessons from the Empress.
Oh, I can read it. Okay.
Okay,
Yay,
good.
I'm so excited. They're here. I will pull them in. And then I am going to turn my camera back off.
Okay, fantastic.
Yay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Great. Yes, hello.
Now you can see me.
Yes. Hi, welcome.
Hi.
I am so excited to talk to you both about this book.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, of course, of course. I guess I should introduce the two of you first before I dive into this, although there was so much like queer theory informed writing in here that I just want to dive into it, kind of like we did last year.
Yeah.
So today, and did I pronounce your name correct? Siri Plouffe?
Yes, Siri. Yes.
Great. So we have Cassandra Snow and Siri Plouffe, authors of Lessons from the Empress, a tarot workbook. It's an incredible book about the Empress, about rituals you can do, self-care. I will get into that in a bit. But yeah, Cassandra Snow, aside from being a guest last year graciously for Pan-Paracon, where we talked about tarot, they are also the author of Queering the Tarot and Queering Your Craft. They're a professional tarot reader and teacher, also works in theater, and the bio on the back, obsesses over tabletop role-playing games. We should probably talk about that at some point too. Siri is a Nordic witch, writer, teacher, and professional rune and tarot reader, the host of the Heathen's Journey podcast, dedicated to creating a space about heathenry from an anti-racist queer perspective. Thank you both. Thank you both so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Of course. I think we talked about reading excerpts from the book. I don't know if you still want to do that.
Yeah, so just letting everyone know, because Vanessa and us talked about a lot of things. And then also, I can't speak for Siri, but I know Vanessa and I have also just had a lot of stuff. So Siri and I were figuring that what we would do is we would each talk a little bit about the book, including and especially sort of process stuff like why we wanted to write it, why we wanted to write it together. And then we'd each read an excerpt so you can kind of see where we're coming from. And then we are totally open to answer questions about certainly stuff in the book, creativity and self-care and going through the tarot, looking for that information, book writing process. But also, I think we also talked about anything you got in terms of tarot and witchcraft and whatever.
And again,
stuff.
Queer theory, because like I said, I just, all of it, like about for supporting marginalized people, I was like, oh, this is a radical book also. I am very excited.
Thank you.
Of course.
So I'll jump. So the reason I'm starting is because I am reading straight from the introduction. So it would be a little weird to not start at the top of the book. Siri and I each split the book. So it's pretty 50-50 actually, even after edits and everything, which can kind of butcher your own best intentions sometimes. So Lessons from the Empress, a tarot workbook for self-care and creative growth. This was a book born out of a class that Siri and I created together sort of at the start of the pandemic. And then we did it about a year into the pandemic, I think, called Creating in Weird Times, weird with a Y. That was a class that was pretty much what it sounds like. How do we use our tools like tarot and ritual to use all of this time at home to create things and use that as an outlet for our emotions. Siri and I are both very, I will say, dedicated workshop teachers when we decide that's what we're doing. And the worksheets for this 6 session class ended up being 25 to 30 pages on their own. So we wanted to do something with it after it, and we kind of bounced around. Well, what if we put it together as a zine and sold it and split the profits? And then I was like, who wants to read like 100 and something page zine? So we talked about doing the opposite and actually fleshing it out and making it a full book through my publisher, which is Wiser Publishing. As of now, it is a book that is really deeply entrenched in ideas of creativity as a facet of self-care. And so not looking at them as one or the other. Instead, we are arguing that creativity is not just for children and professionals, which is what we often are led to believe or think that it is by society at large. Instead, it is a vital, holistic piece of us that we all have and that we need to nurture. This is how we find our voice. When Vanessa talked about the queer theory, that was a big part of it. Like, this is how we find and use our voice. However, we are both, pleasure activists, pleasure witches as well. And it is also fun and it feels good to be artistically inclined, even if right now in this session, you have no idea what that means to you yet. That is okay. Hopefully we will get you there. If not today, then after you buy the book. But we also would love to take some questions from people watching or listening at the end, so you have some tangible takeaways. I'm going to be honest, we just didn't plan any. So that being said, I'm going to dive in. We did this book through the lens of the Empress. As you could tell, there were a lot of big ideas presented. Like, how do you talk about self-care and creativity and make sure that it is a tarot book and make sure that the pieces of ritual are very good and deep and tangible, but also are like a piece of a greater whole. So we thought going through the lens of the Empress, who kind of touches on and really watches over and nourishes all of those things, was a really good fit. So in the intro, which I'm about to read you, we'll get a little more into that. So I'm going to read you 2 relatively short pieces. I am never offended if you need to stretch or walk around or doodle, and I can't see you anyway because I think we're in webinar. So we will jump in now. When you conjure up an image of the Tarot's Empress card, what do you see? In my mind, the Empress is seated on a throne in a lush and verdant landscape, wearing a luxuriant robe and holding a shield with the symbol for Venus on it. The Empress is at ease with themselves, well taken care of and satisfied. Not only satisfied with the surrounding abundance, but also satisfied because the Empress has created things. This robe, this shield, this garden, even this throne. Everything around the Empress began as an idea, a seed, and they got busy planting, creating, and nurturing every last seed into being. This is how we see the Empress represented in the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot deck. And even though the tarot is being constantly reimagined and updated, this take on the Empress endures, consistently rendered in a way that captures the ideal Venusian creatrix. As a set of 78 cards, the tarot has endless lessons to teach us. Creative types and marginalized people are often distinctly drawn to the lessons of the Empress. The Empress has learned to collaborate with the land and create a nurturing space of abundance and peace. The Empress is free to be completely themselves in this creation that they birthed into existence, made both from them and for them. This is what all of us are always trying to do, create our most authentic selves into being and hold space for them in a place of abundance and peace. The Empress teaches us that acts of creation are the ultimate practice of self-care. This authentic self, this abundant space is not something we go find. It is something we create. I'm skipping a paragraph. And then our goal with Lessons from the Empress is to give you the tools you need to do just that. We believe that working toward the Empress ideals of nurturance via self-care to the point of luxury, self-expression, and creation are vital to a holistic, satisfying life. The tarot has all the information you need to embrace these ideals yourself. The Empress has an abundance of lessons to teach you, ways to love, support, and speak for yourself. You just have to walk through the journey to internalize them. And the next thing I'm going to read starts that for you a little bit. And it is a quirkier piece that I wrote. And it's actually an equation for what we are meaning when we say self-care in this book, and what we are meaning when we say creativity. And those two are not always interchangeable, and in fact may not often be interchangeable, but with the lens we took through the book, and certainly for the equation piece, they are. Let me take a sip of water and then I'll dive in. That little voice in your head, the one that says you can't, that tells you to stay quiet, the one that's always judging you, that little guy has to go. We know you've heard this before and it's easier said than done, but it can be done. In fact, getting rid of that voice is a lot of what we're here to do, to make the big ideas that tarot, self-care, and creativity present cohesive and less overwhelming. We need to break them down in a way that is understandable, solvable, and achievable. That goal led us, believe it or not, to creating an equation that would help you understand the big ideas presented in each suit and throughout this book more clearly. The equation we developed looks like this, but feel free to sit with these ideas and futz with the occasion to make it work for you. Ours looks like, Siri, do you mind typing it in for me again? I'm sorry, I should have planned ahead. I want you to, for me, it would really help to have a visual, so Siri is gonna type it into the chat for you. So, parenthesis, imagination plus reflection plus expression, close parenthesis, minus judgment of self equals creativity / self-care. For those of you who don't remember your PEMDAS, this is a segue. You do the stuff in parentheses first, and then you do the rest of it. And so you're subtracting that judgment of self-care from what those things are together. Now, without the parentheses, it would still do that, but it looks more readable this way. So, what does that mean for us in the practical? How do we actually apply this to creative methods in our self-care practice? Let's explore that now. 1, everything begins in your imagination. Imagination is the seed that became the Empress Garden of Abundance. Those ideas in your head, flashes of images, dreams, bits of nonsense, that's your imagination percolating, your imagination at play. 2, what do we do with all of the great visuals or ideas our imagination brings us? That's where reflection comes in. Take some time to really look at those ideas, those flashing images, reflect on an idea, and you will hopefully see what the scope of it can be or what it should look like in a more tangible format. Do not ask yourself, how can the thing I imagine turn into a real thing? Instead, ask, now that I've thought about it, what does it mean and why does it resonate for me? This is the part that gets people hung up. Reflection takes time and grace. Reflection is a vital aspect of self-care. It is an aspect of rest, a necessary part of our journey. Rest heals, rest rejuvenates, and rest resets our mind. It also just feels good. There's a reason why the phrase well rested fills us with satisfaction. As we think about stepping back from the countless ideas our imagination spews out, it's important to remember we are stepping back. Magic has to percolate, and so does creativity. Imagine, then reflect. In other words, play, then rest. Number 3, now we add expression to imagination and reflection in our equation. Expression is the flavor of the piece. This is when we add in details that really make our work our own. These details might include your experience or point of view, how you've been impacted by the medium you're creating in, or it can be as simple as your unique spin on your medium or the tools you create with. This is why retellings or remakes can be at least as good or better than the originals, because of the creator's expression. 4, our equation continues with subtraction. Get rid of that inner critic by eradicating judgment of self from our creative equation. Sometimes when we add imagination, reflection, and expression together, we come to conclusions that are uncomfortable for us. Maybe they're uncomfortable because they challenge who we thought we were. Maybe they're uncomfortable because the creative work seems to want to push the bounds of what is possible for us to say. Maybe they are uncomfortable because they are simply unexpected. In any case, the only way to approach creating authentically is to eradicate judgment of self. This is the part that's easier said than done. We know that. It is also the part that will free you the most if you allow yourself to really let go of it. This book is a container for you to tackle whatever you want or need to tackle. If by the end you're still not comfortable sharing with the world at large, that's okay. Give yourself space to say or create whatever you need to say or create now, and just see how that changes your perspective. When we release judgment of self, ourselves and our creations thrive. It's in this hardest piece of the equation that we truly learn the most valuable lessons from the Empress. Let's begin. And then Siri's gonna jolt us into the major arcana where we have already.
You muted right at the end of your sentence, but it's fine.
It just said for a while.
Cool. All right. Yeah, so hi, I'm Siri. I have de-yellowed myself, which is why I kept turning off my camera. Cassandra told a little bit of the story, well, most of the story actually, of like how this book came to be at the beginning. And so I don't know. I mean, this book has felt like a whirlwind to me in a lot of ways, to be honest. Part of that is just timing. Part of that is that you work really, really hard to get a book out there, and then you wait for months. And then you have a lot of work to do in a couple days, and then you wait for months again. And so it's like this very weird, like, unreal process. But I'm very happy that we're here, that it's happening. And yeah. So leading up to my section, I wrote the section on the major arcana, which are kind of like the big outside of a suit cards of the tarot. So, you know, these are the big cards like the Lovers, Death, the Empress is a major arcana. And I really adored writing this section because I like to think about archetypes, and my primary creative expression, aside from, you know, writing like nonfiction works or podcast episodes, is my like narrative style, like novel writing or fiction writing. And so the major arcana really feels like it tells a story to me, and I was very happy to sort of bring some of my knowledge of storycraft into this chapter on the tarot. So without further ado, I will read. All right. You are gonna stay put, Wednesday. Okay. Archetypes and spiritual self-care. The major arcana are life's deepest secrets personified. The major arcana represent the big cosmic points in our lives. When these cards come up over and over again in our readings, we know to stop and pay attention. While the minor arcana represent keys to the secrets of the everyday world, cat. These cards usher us into a heroic journey. There are so many different angles from which the tarot works for us. It is full of twists and turns. Tarot can be for everyday life. Seriously, bud, you have to like move. Sorry, I thought that we could have a guest, but alas, no, we can't.
The cat is welcome, but
oh, he was like, it's fine. If he's distracting me, I'm sure he's distracting everyone. All right, so the major arcana helps us to understand the backbone of story structure, and it can be really helpful, particularly for narrative creators. This part of the tarot is all about larger than life archetypes. The major arcana represents the flashpoint moments in our life. We always have some kind of major arcana energy moving through the energy of each of these cards as if they are seasons of our life. So some styles of witchcraft to play with: ceremonial magic, casting a Wiccan circle, drawing down the moon, seasonal rites, and deep pathworking meditations. Some styles of creativity to play with: novel writing, storytelling, character creation, GMing a Dungeons and Dragons or other role-playing tabletop game. The major arcana is organized in a very specific way. It tells a story. Starting with the Fool and moving through to the world, the major arcana unfolds before us. We are the Fool, wandering our way through these new landscapes and meeting new magical allies. We are learning as we go and discovering deeper aspects of ourselves. This wandering journey is often called the hero's journey. Each card of the major arcana represents an archetype. Archetypes are a recurrent symbol or motif in literature, art, or mythology. Many occultists and witches work with archetypes as an embodiment of a concept they want to draw into their lives, or as something that will teach them these important lessons. Remember that tarot altar building exercise? That's a part of it. They are also a gateway into understanding how tarot can help us with our creativity. Tarot uses the language of archetypes to communicate. The archetype is a symbol or motif that we recognize in our unconscious self that speaks to us and therefore helps us read the cards. In the major arcana, we see a clear story and we find ourselves in certain places on the journey at specific points in the process. The structure of the major arcana can mirror any type of hero's journey. The hero's journey is not one thing. It is used in psychology and creative theory to discuss the journey either we or fictional characters make in our lives. There's a huge difference between the psychological hero's journey and the creative hero's journey. Tarot writers often try to bridge the gap, but this book, for obvious reasons, will focus on the creative hero's journey. The hero's journey is one tool of many to learn the major arcana, but we are using Rachel Pollack's take on it to ease you into this work. Famed tarot expert Pollack noticed that the order of the major arcana draws on a heroic story structure, which is why the majors are often called the Fool's Journey. We meet each of the major arcana as if we are the Fool, going through our own story. There is a progression. If the progression weren't important, the arcana would not be numbered, and that dates back to the very first tarot deck. The transition from using archetypes as a storytelling technique to their use in magic is fairly natural. In our earlier discussion about tarot and ritual, we talked about how the objects and symbols that occultists use represent their intentions playing out in the mundane world. Archetypes themselves can work this way too. The archetype can become someone that you want to be, an aspect of self that you want to connect with. And it can also represent mentors and teachers in your life. The major arcana then positions us as being in a relationship to and also embodying the different archetypes. It helps us to make the connections about what archetypal roles we are playing and perhaps even the figures we need to seek out. The major arcana is a collection of challenges, allies, teachers, and opportunities that are present in our lives. Sometimes we need archetypes that are ultimately supportive. For example, if you are getting married, you may want to embody the lovers to help you make the transition. Sometimes we need the opposite of the energy that we currently have. If we are clinging on to something that isn't working, we might want to embrace the death card as we get ready for change. There are so many beautiful archetypes that the popular texts on them don't cover. In my spiritual practice, common archetypes include the oracle, the hag, and the gender-bending trickster. In queer community, we both think of archetypes like the community itself, chosen family, drag queens, the first brick thrower at Stonewall, and the incomparable visual archetype of a hot butch in a leather jacket leaning against a brick wall. That last one just might be Cassandra. Occasionally, these do make their way into tarot. The Slow Holler Tarot actually rewrites the Empress as Kindred, a portrayal we both absolutely love. All right.
I think
I'm going to stop there.
Yeah. I was like, I think that's our samples. So
Perfect. So, and thank you for reading excerpts of this book. I wanted to, so obviously I want to get into like tarot and also the lessons of this book. You talked about co-authoring, touched on that a little bit. What is that like? Because it does, there's, I mean, clearly there are two of you, but there is definitely this kind of cohesive voice in here. How is that process for the both of you?
Okay, so this is really cute, actually. So for the workshop itself, I'll kind of start there. We were like, okay, well, just to make it easier, we're going to kind of select the different days that we'll each focus on. And of course, we'll both co-teach on those days, but like one person will be kind of the point or lead or whatever. So that was that. But then so as we were drafting, of course, you know, whichever day we took the lead on, we fleshed those chapters out and kind of like brought that forward. And if there were other chapters we wanted to add in, we just discussed, you know, like who would write what. And then at the end, we actually have very different writing styles, which, you know, our writing group will say, like we submitted chapters to our writing group or excerpts to our writing group. And they immediately knew like which one was which, you know, even had we not told them, they would have known. So what we did was we actually read each other's sections to one another. So I read to Cassandra the pieces that they wrote aloud, and they read to me the pieces that I wrote aloud. And we made edits to kind of ensure that the voice remained consistent throughout, because I think that that's a really important part of a book. You don't just want to be like, and now this chapter was written by Cassandra Snow, and now this was written by Siri. So yeah, I think that was a really essential part of the process of us like collaboratively creating that voice.
I also think too, we both knew that we were collaborating and creating. And so once we decided for class, it was fine. Like the students kind of knew, like this person took this week, whatever, and it didn't bother anyone. It just is very different for a book. And so a lot of it is when we started the rewriting process, we both thought about like, okay, what will make this match Siri? And our goal was never really to match, it was to blend, like, okay, what will make this smooth and cohesive? And the really boring publishing answer is that we went through several rounds of editing on our own to just smooth things over. We did find that a lot of writing style stuff needs worked on for both of us anyway. Like I really love a run-on sentence, and Siri really loves commas. Like I have never met anyone who loves commas as much as Siri does when they're writing.
Listen, there are also like whole ass paragraphs in this book that I was just like, Cassandra, this is not a sentence. This is a paragraph.
Oh no, I love run-on sentences. And so I
do too. I just delineate them with commas.
And so once I made 7 sentences, and once Siri replaced some commas with periods and some commas with nothing, the style differences were not actually as substantial as we thought. And so then
rest assured, some commas did make it into the book.
this is not a commaless book. I would also argue that this is not a run-on sentenceless book, because I am also a brat and I will fight for a run-on sentence I think is really important. And so
yeah, well, sometimes it's a stylistic choice, right?
yeah.
Yes.
So I say all that to say, then we sent it to Wiser and they were like, we think it's fine. They just changed some minor things. The biggest thing they did was they said, well, what if we made this a stylistic choice? And so the paragraphs that could not be fixed, and frankly shouldn't have been, because they were so integral to what one of us was trying to say, and so integral to the fact that it was in our voice, and that's like the point of the book. So they have some like asides and what almost looks like thought bubbles and stuff like that in the book. And I actually thought that was a really cool stylistic way that also breaks up reading endless paragraphs. And I think once we saw that, we knew what we could do. Uh-huh.
Oh, I was just saying, we love a good layout.
We do.
Well, and especially too, since it's a workbook, right? So there is that like, oh, okay, I'm breaking up my attention. Here is another point that I should pay attention to. Then here are exercises I'm going to do. I don't know, that seeing those little pull quotes, essentially, that got me more in the mindset of, oh, this is a process that I'm working through. This isn't just a book that's being thrust at me and information thrust at me. So I like that in terms of engagement.
Yeah.
So I guess for both of you too, like I already talked to you about this, but like, what was your journey to starting to work with the tarot?
Like a million years ago? Or?
Yeah, as far back as you want to go. Yeah. Well, wherever you want to start that origin story.
So my start with the tarot was very like kind of up and down and almost convoluted. When I was 18 and going through a whole bunch of trauma, someone I am not friends with anymore, who's a terrible person, sorry if they're here, but like, thrust a deck of cards into my hands and was like, you're psychic, read these. And that was not a word I had used for myself. I had never even looked at cards before. I actually was in a Christian singing group, to tell you how far removed from this culture I was. So I was like really freaked out. And then I was more freaked out when I started looking at the cards, and it was like I was freaked out for two very different reasons. I was freaked out because they were a little cartoony. It was a very old novelty Lord of the Rings deck. And I was like, this isn't scary at all. And something in my brain was like, what else has church been lying to me about? Like, this is not scary or hard. And so I was having like a crisis of faith. And at the same time, what the cards were telling me was that I was lying to everyone about everything all the time. I was very in the closet then. I did not disclose some of the trauma I was going through until literally years later. And so it freaked me out, but for a very different reason than I thought it would. So I didn't touch the cards again until I was a little more willing to face it. But I was also in a different place then. I had really separated from that singing group and from sort of the church as a whole for different reasons, but related. And I started hanging out with friends who were not like, frankly, the kind of person I am now. Like, they were not like, they weren't even like witches or anything like that. They were just people who read tarot sometimes. Like, I guess I just kind of lucked out with that and fell into that. And so at that point, I started doing it more and more for fun. When I moved to the Twin Cities, I really thought that I was gonna stay in arts admin forever. But I was reading tarot more and more. I was reading for other people a lot. People were starting to just like give me, I'm 37. This was actually pre-Venmo. So people would just give me cash in exchange for whatever cards I could do. And I was not even really charging. And then I got really sick, and the writer, Alex Franzen, I had done a reading for her that I didn't even feel was very good. to be honest. But she got very excited and filled my head with like, this is what you should be doing with your life. This is brilliant, blah, blah, blah. And like, I really, in my 26-year-old form, took that to heart and was like, yes, this is what I should be doing with my life. And so then I had some medical emergencies. I got fired from the big game in town, arts admin wise. And I was left sick, but with clients who wanted to come in. And that's the super short version, believe it or not. Because obviously I didn't go from, I guess this is what I'm doing for a living, to having multiple books out and not really worrying about money that often. So, but that's more or less it.
Amazing. Yes.
Yeah. So for me, witchcraft came first. Magic came first. When I was a teen, I was in a coven. That like an actual Wiccan coven. And was one day, like the high priestess looked at me and said, "You need to go buy a tarot deck." And so I took my coven mate with me to the now defunct Borders.
Oh, rest in peace.
I know.
Oh, it's so good. I actually, okay, an aside, I read that I saw somewhere that Barnes and Noble is looking at employing some of the techniques that Borders used while they were hopping, like taller bookshelves and more clear like names and stuff. And I was just like, that's right. Noble. Yeah, your comeuppance from this store that is long dead. Anyway, yeah, I didn't have like a local bookstore where I was from. Like the Borders in like the town that was a 40-minute drive away was our bookstore. Anyway, so many good memories. So I came home with a deck, and because it had been sort of introduced to me as part of like a coven thing, like I was very like, okay, well, this is something that I only do on like the full moon after I have thrown up a full circle. This is something I only do in like the full like 9 or 10 card Celtic cross spread. And so my relationship with tarot is actually very kind of fractured for a long time. I would say that I have been reading continuously since then, but like not, it took me a while to get to the point where I was like reading more daily. And then what in my mind felt like the tarot renaissance of 2014/2015 happened, which is when there were a couple of really amazing blogs that were, you know, around. Like the Little Red Tarot blog was more community based at the time. And so I was learning more there. You know, I was seeing people being like, oh yeah, like I just have my tarot deck in my bag and I pull a card if I'm like struggling at work or something. And so I was like, really? Like you can just do that? Which shifted my focus with tarot and made me realize like, oh, like I could be doing, you mean I don't need permission to do this every damn day of my life? Like that's cool. So I kind of shifted that. And that also incidentally was like around the time when I left the coven when I moved out of my hometown. And then I had been basically solitary Wiccan for many years. And I was moving away from Wicca as well at that time. So now I identify primarily as a folk magician, and I was starting to try to figure out what flavor of paganism I really wanted to be. If it was to be solitary and not Wiccan in focus. So that kind of more like, oh, you mean I can do magic every day? I don't have to do it on the lunations, like lunations being the new and full moon. You mean like, oh, like I can do like I don't have to follow the Sabbats if it doesn't make sense to me? Like, whoa, okay. So that kind of attitude permeated. This was also around the time where people that I was a little petty. I've grown. I was seeing people that I had that I knew had only been studying tarot for a year or two, going pro and having that be their full-time thing. And like, it was to the point where somebody who used to make fun of me in high school for being witchy was inviting people over to her like Brooklyn apartment for wine and tarot nights. And I was like, bitch, no, I'm going to do this instead. And I'm going to do it better than you. And I am better than her. She also doesn't do it publicly anymore, from what I understand, and like has grown as a person and, you know, all of that shit. So like, as I clearly have as well. But so that's kind of my story in terms of like how I started really deepening my tarot practice and getting like much more interested in reading professionally. It was almost out of spite, the professional side of it, but I absolutely adore working with clients. I was a reader at a psychic fair at a local shop in town here today, and my clients were just so cute. I just loved them all. And yeah, I'm very thankful for this life.
I love it. I mean, first of all, I'll just say my moon is in Scorpio, so anything petty, anything spiteful, like it sings.
Get this. My moon is in Scorpio, but my Jupiter is in Gemini.
Oh.
So I'm gonna be petty.
I really, yeah, I have my petty moments. I definitely, so my queer platonic partner in Siri will very often, and my best friend will very often get very petty in my defense, and they can get me very riled up when I'm like, well, I'll just be like, oh, this thing happened and this person probably should have been nicer to me, but it's whatever. And they're like, no. But I will say, I just, when I get pushed to the brink, I've just, I don't know. I like it too. I like when other people are petty, even if I'm like, well, I'm just going to leave them alone.
I'm remembering you're a Pisces, right? Didn't we talk about this last year?
I'm a double Pisces with a Cancer rising. And Jesus. So with the Cancer rising, and also my Aries and Mars are in, my Venus and Mars are in Aries. So it will also not surprise you to know that I will get not only petty, but downright mean for other people very quickly. And in some ways that's good, right? It fuels my activism, it whatever. But then in other ways, I am like, I'm going to go down to your work and scream at your boss. And my sister is like, do not, absolutely do not do that. I do not consent to you doing this. When it's me, I'm just like, well, that's Tuesday for you.
So my Venus and Mars are in Pisces, so I'm just like, I guess I'll just mope in a corner. But then that Scorpio moon activates, and the 3 planets in Sagittarius, my Jupiter, also just like flame on, like let's go to war.
Yeah, that's real. The Scorpio moon, like the Scorpio moon struggles are very real.
It's all the feelings all the time. Yes.
Yeah. I also relate to, like, I feel like a Pisces moon is a little more, I will say, edgy than a Pisces sun. And so there definitely is still like the me that everyone knows, which is genuine, but then the me that my friends knows is not quite as passive as that would lead you to believe.
Exactly. Exactly. It's the depths, but that you only show to the people that you trust, because there's just so much there. It's like, who is going to carry this? Oh, the people who love me will carry this. Nobody else will. So I'm not even going to bother.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, again, you said at the top that you're both pleasure witches. The Scorpio, the water signs, I think absolutely feeds into that. And that is something that I love, because you talk in the book about this idea of self-care, but it is incredibly activist oriented, right? It's not just like get your nails done, take a bath. It's a more grounded practice in like taking care of yourself, rooting yourself. So for you, like, how did maybe that like watery sensibility inform your talk about self-care in the book?
I mean, sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, I know for me, part of it is that my activism itself, since my first book, has gotten light years away from itself, as has my witchcraft, as has my tarot practice. And right now I am so much more interested in collaboration and the world that we are all building together. And so I think for me, the watery piece is that love of relationship and wanting to bring that in. I almost want the reader to feel like they're sitting down, hanging out with me, talking about this. So I think that's actually my biggest answer, which is like the other side of the water signs that we did not talk about, but like that's definitely a big piece of it for me for this book specifically.
Yeah. So not to throw out my whole chart there on Maine, but I am also like a Cancer sun and a Virgo rising. So very like grounded water, I would say. And that Scorpio feels like well water to me. And Cancer feels like a river to me. And then there's like that Virgo and sort of like earth energy. And so I would actually say that for me, it feels more like self-care isn't true self-care unless it's in the ecosystem of your life. And so, like, of course, our values, our activism, our relationships with other people are going to be part of our self-care. Like, they just will be, because like that's essential. Like it's absolutely essential. So I feel like where a lot of self-care books get things wrong, not wrong, just like not deep enough for my tastes, I should say, is in not, talking about different modes of like rest, or like how pleasure is actually a really important and essential part of self-care and rest. And if you're not enjoying it, it's not actually that restful. Like, yeah, if, you can be like, okay, like I'm going to read all these, like I'm going to follow these self-care Instagram accounts or whatever, and they're all saying to go take a bath. So I'm going to go take a bath. But if you hate taking baths, like that's not actually self-care at that point. You're just going through yet another motion. And so I feel like to bring that in, those values in for us was very, very important. And I mean, it's just like, it's a part of both of us that like we can't really not incorporate in our work. So whether it's this or like, for me, like fiction or, other creative endeavors, like it always does tie back into those core values.
Well, and I will say too, to sort of just conversate with that, I also think both of us have such a genuine love of tarot. We have such a genuine love of the people who have supported us online. We have such a genuine love of ritual itself, of the spirits and entities that we work with. And so I feel like, I don't know, almost like it does add that almost romance to the way we write the book and the way that we sort of put it out there.
Yeah.
Just like everything that we do. Like we both are people who are much more concerned with what is good and what do we love about this that we can share than we are about, I don't know, anything else.
Yeah.
Well, and I think like for me that comes through because I just started like taking all of these frantic notes in terms of like how radical this was, because that speaks to like my background and my interest, right? Like critical theory, Herbert Marcuse, that reclaiming of the eros, and also that inherently like anti-racist, anti-capitalist, like supporting marginalized voices, supporting people of marginalized identities, because so much of what we do and are expected to do is just grind through this capitalist machine that serves people who don't look like us, who have a lot more money than we do, who we will never interact with, unless we unfortunately have a service job that they happen to wander into, right?
Right.
And the power of saying like, no, I'm creating space for me and affirming what is important to me, is incredibly powerful. It's inherently a radical act. Claiming pleasure in a society that is trying to alienate you from your body is an inherently radical, powerful, transgressive act. So like I said, just lots of writing.
Yes. So one thing that I really want to, that I have been thinking about a lot lately and sort of shedding in the pandemic, is, you know, like I used to have this deep need to be taken seriously. And I, to a certain extent, still do. I think that a lot of what I write is very serious. If you listen to my podcast episodes, like, yes, I do write in a very serious tone a lot of the time, but also like, that doesn't mean that I should carry any shame about like the goofy shit that I love.
Yes.
Like I bought Furbies like in the pandemic.
We both did. We it was like the same week too. I was like, Siri, you're never gonna believe what I got on eBay and did. And they were like, oh my God.
And Furbies are like a thing that like I wanted desperately as a child, and this is maybe like part of the paranormal part of this conference. I don't know, but like when I was a kid, I sincerely believed that the FBI had planted bugs in Furbies and was listening to people, and I wanted to get to the bottom of it. I thought, I'm going to be the one to crack the story. And then my parents also refused to get me any Furbies as a child, which at the time I assumed was because they didn't want a government spy living in their home. And now I realize is fully because they're annoying.
No, they're perfect. I love them.
I mean, yes, they're very perfect. And also, like, I know that my parents just did not want to deal with like Furby noises at all.
I will, yeah. And I think I forgot what I was gonna say. Anyway.
That's like definitely something that I have fully, I think writing lessons from the Empress, I think like being in lockdown, all of that has really just been like, no, like pleasure is radical, and there's this weird shame of like, yeah, like, oh, I have to be like serious and I have to be like on trend, and like now I've just been like, you know what, no, maybe I want a necklace with like Barbie legs hanging off of it, that's fine.
Yes. Does it bring me joy, right?
Yeah.
Like then it's powerful and it's important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I think for me too, so I have always had like dual fears, and like if we're talking like self-confidence issues and stuff like that, where like if I know someone takes me seriously, I get insecure that they don't think I'm fun, and then vice versa. If someone is having fun with me, I'm like, oh, they think I'm stupid. And so I like long ago had to just deal with it and be like, I'm gonna be who I'm gonna be today, it's whatever. And so I didn't have that piece, but I will say that I have grown more confident, and like it was sort of a fake it before you make it thing. Now I feel like through the process of working with the tarot over so many years, and then writing this book, and then doing this activism we've done over all these years, I've actually landed at a place of like, and then that genuine love too. Like love is goofy, and it doesn't matter if it's like a person or a thing. Like if I am not going to want to be with a partner and just never laugh, then why would I want to have a lifelong commitment to my cards and never laugh? Why would I want to have like, why? So
Yeah, I think it's like really that idea that like you have to be cool or like you have to be taken seriously, and to do that you need like the best clothes or whatever the heck. That is all purely like white supremacist
Yeah.
hegemony. Just like this is what you need to do, and if you don't do this you're going to have shame, because guess what, like shame keeps us from so much revolutionary work. And also shame, like you're never going to be perfect, you're never going to have like the like perfect track record in terms of interests and like things that you like or clothing or whatever it is. Like you're never going to be the perfect consumer. Ooh, there we go. Capitalism.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that too about, because I talk a lot about trauma work. That was like some of my undergrad stuff, like domestic violence and this idea of, I think the reason I always talk about trauma when I can is because it's inherently transgressive, because we're not supposed to talk about these things. Again, we're supposed to keep our heads down and be good little workers and not feel our feelings and not acknowledge how traumas of the past have shaped our experiences and shape our present right now, and the work that we have to do to decouple ourselves, right, and to get back to that authenticity. And I think too that that's why so many people are resistant to and even hate the idea of play, the idea that you can't, like you said, you can't be a serious adult if you're having fun, if you're laughing, if you're playing, that somehow that precludes you from having sophisticated ideas, of talking about important things, and again of accessing those real things deep in yourself. So I'm constantly like, no, like how can we play more? How can we do more of this? Again, I always point to my bookcase like I know where any of these books are, but it could be on the shelf over there. Homo Ludens by Johann Huizinga. Like his whole thesis is that human society exists because we learned how to play together in order to get work done for our survival. And then and that's why, animals play, we all play it, it's inherent in the condition of life. Why do we say, oh no, this is bad? Because it's authentic, right? It gets you to that subjective, powerful reality where I love this. This is more important than what, like you said, what consumer culture is telling us that how we should express ourselves to be good. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, a big part of that is what works for you, what is good for you, and really honing in on what actually makes you happy, what actually fills you with pleasure. It might be the silliest thing, and it might still be something super serious. I know all three of us still love reading very heavy grad school level books in our downtime, but like, again, that doesn't mean, I also think we even read those wrong, because sometimes I'm like, that was obviously a joke this serious author made, and no one has ever told me this guy was funny before. And so I think learning to walk that walk of just what really makes you feel embodied and good and filled with joy, and therefore inspires you and restores you for all of the other work that we're all doing together. I think another big piece of this is letting go of the like white savior hero mentality.
Yes.
Because we want to be taken seriously, because deep down we all think that we are the one that is going to turn the tide somehow. And in reality, that's not a thing. And so, and like you said, Vanessa, when people are together doing things, it's automatically playful, it's automatically fun. You still need that alone time for, to rest. So I don't really remember where I was going with that, but I know the core point is like figuring out what works for you, so that you have the reserves to be with other people, knowing that even if you're really introverted, that can still be just as fun and pleasurable and restorative, even if you're all doing very serious work together.
Right. And it's again figuring out like okay, what is important to you, right? Like doing that internal work is so necessary so that you can work with other people, because sometimes you have to, like, again, moon in Scorpio, trauma background, I need lots of alone time. It's restorative for me. But then, there's a conference like this and I have to be social for multiple days at a time, but it's like, it is an intentional choice. It's a thing I'm doing because I love it. And I'm excited about it. Like, will I sleep for 3 days afterwards? Probably. But again, it's that intentional use of resources that can only happen when you've done that internal work to know what really matters to you, what is truly pleasurable, what is joyful, and again, approaching all that work with a light heart so that you can engage it in a meaningful way, and it's not just like, doom and gloom and agony, right? Again, we all have water sign, significant water placements. We feel a lot of agony very deeply, but like not adding to more of that, right? Just that, like, I don't know, just intentional, like talking about too. What I love in the book is looking at the Empress again as this creative force, right? Because I do love that you kind of you talk more in terms of like a creator as opposed to that like maternal kind of archetype that often gets associated with the Empress, right? It's broader. It's like, again, that like creative fertility, like, and I guess for this, it's like, oh, so the Empress is clearly this evocative figure for the both of you. Again, that idea of this like luxurious, powerful figure who, knows themselves, knows how to move in the world. How did you develop, I guess, your relationship with the Empress and the tarot?
Ooh, yeah.
So for me, I do have an archetype. Like, I do call in archetypes or build altars to things. And in the chapters that are on the major arcana, I do give you a lot of kind of ideas and exercises for working with specific archetypes. This could be like, say you're experiencing intense writer's block, like calling in Empress energy to learn from it could be really helpful. So that definitely, like, I definitely poured, like, and that's why I usually like read from that chapter because or that section, because that's like really, I really loved putting that together. I think too, for the Empress, getting to know the Empress specifically, like, this kind of goes back to some tarot classes that I took when I was first becoming like more of a professional tarot reader. I took the Brooklyn Fools online tarot program, which I don't think he does it anymore. But basically we met for 22 weeks and every week we were a different archetype and we were focusing on a different archetype. And so, of course, like, I met the Empress, like, at that time in a very magical, ritualistic way, as I met the rest of the arcana, which is probably honestly like why I work with them that way, the way that I do, because that was very formative.
Yeah.
I think mine, so I think it's changed throughout time. I think I run when it's not a pandemic, and it still is one out there, folks. But when it's not, I run a theater company, and I've often always thought about pulling in the Empress that way because I love the way that this idea, this archetype, like, makes everything around it grow and flourish. And so even if we are seeing the Empress and like the title is a rulership title, there's so much of a handing that over and seeing what grows. And so I thought about that a lot with theater work. And specifically, how do I really hand it over so that we are all, the Empress and making this together? I think in the pandemic, I was a very stereotypical like trend person. Everyone was getting a bunch of plants and I was like, I could do that. And so but as Siri, who has been in my apartment many times, can tell you, like, I'm actually pretty good at it. And so my plants are mostly flourishing. Turns out mint does need a well-drained thing. That's not just a rumor. So that one died, but otherwise we're doing pretty good. So I say that to say, because so much of even the metaphor that we use in the book is about like growing. I think working that process, learning how plants communicate with me, learning what signs to pick up on, really helped the book, and vice versa. I think it kind of gave me a lot to think about as I was moving through that. And I think that I didn't think about plant care or even pet care really as like creative output until I started doing it. And then that changed a lot. And I've always done pet care, but I would say my relationship with plants has even changed that. So
It's funny you mention this because I have a whole enormous plant shelf, and I had one plant before the pandemic started. I feel like I got into plants later than everybody else, but I absolutely did. And for me, it's kind of this other aspect of the Empress, this idea of relationship, because
yeah,
when you have plants, like you said, sometimes that mint, like it just doesn't do well, right? Or like I tried, I'm on my third time for sage. The first two times, like nothing I looked online actually worked. Now I seem to have a rhythm with it, but it's you're essentially interacting with this other living thing and tending to it and seeing what it needs, and also looking at what it needs as opposed to what you see what it needs, as opposed to what other people online are telling you what it needs, right? Like you
yeah.
are actually interacting with that. And I didn't mean to say this as a segue, but you also in the book talk about developing, what I like is that you list out all the cards and what their traditional meanings are, but then leave space for people to develop and write down the personal interpretations of the cards. How is your relationship with tarot? Like, do you have certain cards that they just mean very specific things to you outside of what any traditional system? Obviously, you don't feel like you have to dish too much, but I like.
I've been usurped. But you gotta go.
I'm gonna grab that screenshot when we have a recording of this.
I have been replaced.
What does the cat have to say about tarot?
He loves it, actually. He likes to lay across a large spread when I do like my year ahead readings for people.
Amazing.
He likes to sit in. I host a thing called Tarot Study Hall via my Patreon, and he likes to just sit here and watch me during Tarot Study Hall. And now he apparently wants to be on this panel. So.
He has things to say about the Empress too. So
like, I have sat here this whole process.
Right. Let me tell you a thing or two about this book and how it came together.
Sorry, what was the question?
Just about well, and I guess too, because yes, so personal relationships with cards, and especially since we've all sort of talked about this issue with perfectionism or being taken seriously, like how do you reconcile with like that deep knowing? Because like for me, the Five of Swords means something so specific, and if it comes up in a reading for somebody else, I know exactly what the situation is, and I just tell them, even though it's not really at all what it typically means. So I guess the twofold, like how you develop personal relationships with the cards, and then how did you reconcile with like that jarring, like this isn't what it's supposed to be, but I know this is actually what it is for me.
I have two very different card examples. So yes, to answer your question, but I have one that is like, no matter how much queering the tarot or radical work I do on the tarot, the Queen of Swords is my queer platonic partner's grandmother, and but is also a very stereotypical reading of the Queen of Swords, if you know her. So there's that one that is like very true. I think I even say that in Queering the Tarot. And so but then I think for me there's one, and we're starting to see this more and more, but I do not read the devil at all the way people often do it. in large part because I practice a lot of Irish and Welsh folk magic, and the witch's devil predates Christian views of it by forever. And so to me, that is just a totally different spiritual entity that you're working with that is absolutely not like bad or whatever. But then also as someone who, I wouldn't say I'm in the community, but as like a BDSM hobbyist, the imagery, uh, the imagery of the devil, and then people being like, "Oh, it's bad." I'm like, that looks fun. What? And so those are my two that I have done a lot of either expounding or lack thereof. I will say one tip I'll give in terms of, so how do you come up with that on your own? This is going to sound a little wild, but try quote unquote writing a tarot book, even if it's never going to be for anyone else. And think about how you've actually seen this card show up for you and like what personal stories you could tell about it and see what that leads you to. So
I love that.
The one that always comes to mind for me is the Eight of Swords. And that's because at a very formative time in my relationship to tarot, the Eight of Swords and the Moon were my, like, the cards that were haunting me. And so they both kind of together ended up meaning at the time, you know what you need to do, dump him.
Yeah.
Which, you know, was a very serious, you know, I lived with him, like,
it's just embarrassing.
Oh.
For him, I feel fine about it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so that Eight of Swords really, like, kind of has become like a, you know what you want to do, but you're not admitting it to yourself, which you could say is still a traditional read on the Eight of Swords, but like, I haven't seen it said exactly the way I feel it, like in books. And the Moon also, I was very stumped at the time by the Moon showing up in this. And I was also very stumped because I was practicing lunar magic. And so, you know, the moon was really this beautiful card, entity, what have you. But the guidebook that I was working with, and I still needed to use the guidebook at this time, would say that the moon is like hidden anxieties, which again is a more traditional like interpretation of the moon that I think a lot of more contemporary tarot creators have moved away from in light of how many people are doing very like positive, good, cyclical lunar magic. Mm-hmm. So I that's one card that I feel like has really shifted in meaning, like within my lifetime. Mm-hmm. Like seeing that shift from lunar being hidden, like hidden meanings, hidden anxieties, like a cycle that you want to break out of, things like that, to something that's a little bit more like, oh no, you're actually just like really connecting with your psychic depths, and that's great.
Is it weird to you? Because again, I know you've both been practicing for a while, to see kind of this popular shift in certain cards or in the way that readings are even done. I don't know how much either of you even pay attention to other readers aside from each other.
Oh, I definitely do. I'm like a huge consumer, but not in the weird way we talked about it earlier, but I just consume a lot of tarot. I like love learning from other people. And a lot of my friends that I've met online are very good readers and have a lot of interesting things to say. I will say it has definitely been interesting or sort of funny in the way that you've posited. And I've seen that be good or bad, good and bad. And I've also seen it be neutral. I've seen, I have some friends online who I've literally written a book called Queering the Tarot, and they say things and I'm like, that is groundbreaking, radical, like revolutionary content. And I love that. I love seeing it become expansive. I think what is harder for me is when I see people use it to spiritually bypass themselves or other people, or when those sort of bypassing interpretations become common. That is harder for me because I'm watching people do harm in real time, and I don't really feel like it's my place for people I don't know to be like, you're wrong. Like so yeah, there's good and bad to it. I definitely think it's interesting. I also think it's just, no matter what field you're in, I kind of feel like it's just part of being alive. Like, I don't think tarot is like special in watching that.
That's a good point.
Like, I've even seen how much theater has changed and then gone back and then changed again. And the pandemic irrevocably changed theater, except Broadway is like, no, it hasn't. It's the same. And I'm like, okay, good luck, pals. So good luck. Siri, your thoughts?
I mean, I would share a lot of that. I think it's funny because, like, okay, so first of all, like, I didn't think that my first book would be about tarot. I assumed it would be about runes, which is more so where a lot of my expertise comes from. Like, I don't know, like the work that I'm doing with Queering the Runes is, different. And I think that, sorry, like different than, I should be specific, it's not just different, it's like different than the way that a lot of rune readers work with the runes. And so I am working on a book about that. But it has felt very lonely in a way, because of those feeling like I'm a little bit of an island. And then I dive into the tarot side of Instagram and I'm like, holy shit, everyone's mother is starting to do tarot now. Like, like it's again that feeling of like, whoa, this like person who bullied me in high school for being witchy is like hosting like tarot salons in their Brooklyn apartment. Like, what is going on? Whereas with runes, it's much more culturally specific, which I think is really a huge part of it, is that like runes are, I will argue all day, every day, that the runes are available to anyone and everyone who wants to use them, regardless of their own cultural background, regardless of their own ancestry. But the fact of the matter is that runes do come out of these specific, like pre-Christian Norse, like culture, right? So it's just going to have less of a, like, the appeal isn't going to be as broad. Let's just put it that way, as with tarot. So right. All of that to say that it's fun. I don't know. There's some stuff that I'm like, do you read tarot? And there's some stuff that's like, oh, this is really, really cool. I will say one of the things that I get saltiest about is when people call an oracle deck a tarot deck. Like, there's one that's like Tarot of the Night Moon, but it's like very clearly an oracle deck because there are only 30 cards. And I'm just like,
well, and like Siri and I both have that opinion. And to be clear, we're not down on oracle decks. We both use them. Like, we both have some that we use.
I actually,
but it's not tarot.
Yeah, like I adore oracle decks, and I when I see stuff like that, I'm like, just stand in your power is what you are. Like, you're not a 78 card deck that is divided into 4 suits and a major arcana. Like, that's just not what this deck is. Why are you saying that?
Well, right. I mean, it would be like calling, Ogham staves runes, right? Yeah. It's like, this is a different system. It has a different name. And I think goes to also this, like, because again, I love seeing new ideas and more people getting into all the cool things that I'm into.
Mhm.
But I also had that sense, like I read for years without accepting money or only taking money as tips because I thought this is an apprenticeship. I need to learn how to do this before I do it professionally. And I think this is also a broader thing. I don't think it's just a tarot issue, but there are a lot of people who are just suddenly presenting themselves as experts when again they're calling oracle decks tarot decks. It's just like basic terminology, like, okay, so you might get a sense off the cards, but have you done the actual work, the actual study to develop a relationship and then be able to communicate these things effectively to other people?
And I mean, to be more compassionate than my previously petty answers, um,
Pettiness is welcome here.
I will say that I think that a huge part of that is living through late stage capitalism and feeling as though, like, there's this pressure to, like, I'm a millennial, like, the pandemic has changed this a bit in that more people are talking about rest and burnout and stuff like that than I feel like they were pre-pandemic. But that pressure to turn everything that you love into something that you make money doing, because we're living through late stage capitalism, or because we were told that if you love what you do, you will never work a day in your life, or whatever. I think that a lot of people are going pro or presenting themselves as an expert, or trying to edge into multiple professional fields at the same time, is directly a response to that
I
feeling.
agree.
Everything that I do needs to be professionalized.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I would agree with that. I do think that's a big takeaway of the book too, is like have hobbies, even if we never say that outright. But like have things that you do that are just for you, that are actually fun and restorative to you. I think it is so draining to think about monetizing every single thing that you do. And there was a time in my life where I was doing it. I was like, cool, I'm gonna do this and this and this. And now, there's a reason there are legalities around it too, but there are reasons I don't publicize that I will do spell work for people for money. But I do them for my friends regularly. And if they throw money at me, so be it. And some of that is like, especially when it's a spiritual path, especially when it's a creative path, I would argue, even though I am not qualified to speak on this, especially when it's a health path, things should absolutely be for just you sometimes. And that is our society at large, like taking that intimacy with self away from you when you give into that pressure to just produce in that way.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so, again, as somebody who is recovering from, like, I turned my passion into my full-time business for 7 years. And then I just didn't want to, it was chainmail jewelry. And I hit a point where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't think I want to make jewelry anymore, because I had to then produce all this output in order to pay my bills. It was just like there was no, I was losing that sense of play, that sense of exploration, that sense of pleasure, right? Like to use, like, because I also teach, and to use your hands to make something. And I still watch students just come alive because they're not in situations where they're making things for themselves, making things without any external expectation, again, without any expectation that this will turn into a career, a business. It's just,
Yeah.
this is for me right now. And it's so powerful to just do those things for yourself right now. This is what I want to make. This brings me joy. I'm using my hands to make it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I, right out of college, in addition to working in arts admin, I launched a photography business for portrait photography. And if I'm being honest, I don't think I was good enough to have done that. And then also, I'm very proud of some of the work I did anyway, because woo, when you're poor and people give you what to you is a big chunk of money, you pull your shit together pretty fast. So I'm still very proud of most of the shoots I did in that time. But I had like 2 bad experiences in a row, and I was just like, I'm done. And I couldn't sense then that I was burnout, and photography had gone from something I was really passionate about to something that I honestly hated for a while. Yeah, and now it's like getting me to even take the extra 5 seconds to make sure the lighting on a phone pic is better. It's like pulling teeth. I'm like, no, I hate this.
Yeah, I think like a huge theme of the last year for me has been rediscovering hobbies and things that I love. I would also tell myself, oh, you should love this. Why don't you love this? The biggest example of that being D&D.
Yeah.
Which is like, I enjoy D&D when it's like a three session arc. Any longer than that and I am done, like fully. And it's fine, like I love spending time with my friends, I love enjoying things, but like, you know, I'd almost rather like just write a story as a form of creative expression. And that, of course, like I say that I would say you should like this because almost all of my really close friends love D&D, or like board game, like role playing, like tabletop RPGs, or you know, these things. And if you don't love it, like you don't have to do it. And it's also, so you know, there was that aspect of it where me feeling like I should love things that I don't genuinely love. And then the other side of it was like, what do I have the actual energy and drive to do? And you know, for me, like it's nice to have hobbies that are low key as well as hobbies that are generating something. So like writing, you know, my fiction, or you know, something like that, which I guess at this point is really more so a vocation than like a hobby truly. Or I should say like art, like bullet journal spreads or something like that, is more like generative, and I have to, you know, be in a good place to do that. But I also just need hobbies where like I can just like reading, you know, like reading fiction. I've gotten really into like cozy murder mysteries lately. And like you know, like kind of diving into some self-pubbed work and stuff. And you know, it's reading for fun, reading for the joy of it, versus reading for self-betterment, or you know, a lot of other ways that I was telling myself I should be reading. That's another example, saying, oh Siri, you should be reading capital L literary fiction because you want to improve your craft.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, like you will improve your craft if you're reading no matter what.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, if you're reading and you're writing, like that, the
Yeah.
idea, especially with like tarot, like, you know, you, or anything you do, even with chainmail, like people would say like, oh, how do you make these pieces? It's like, because I'm constantly making pieces. Like every piece, like every ring I close is going to be perfect because I've done this tens of thousands of times. Like if you like, even when I teach, people be like, how do you get good closures? I'm like, make a piece of clothing. You do something 12,000 times, you're going to be really good at it, if not perfect.
Well, and I think too, finding stuff that is, like we talk about this in the book a lot, but that is restful and is input. I also think when we talk about having hobbies for yourself, Siri kind of led us right here, which is we're not telling you to go out and pick up new stuff, but reframing stuff that you're already doing as that. Like I say, part of the reason I wanted it very clear in my bio that for this book is that my hobbies include watching a lot of TV and movies, is because I wanted people to know that that's okay. Not only is that still creative input, but it's also rest, which is such a vital piece of it. And when we talk about imagination plus reflection, like we do need to see that in other people's stuff sometimes. And like, TV in general in art circles is considered lowbrow, and I consume the worst TV as well as stuff that's won Emmys, like whatever. And so I think it's really important to remind yourself that, like, I guess to be accountable and just sort of keep track of how you're using your time for a few weeks, and then hopefully you'll be able to get to a point where, like, you're like, okay, well, I do have these hobbies, but I still have some free time that I would like to fill with not just staring at my phone or whatever. And there's nothing against that if you love staring at your phone. I have bad eyes, so I don't love it anymore, but I used to. And so I think that's a really important piece in figuring out what you love, is that it's also okay to have what we think of as more passive things, and in fact you need those.
Yes. I think I hit a really intense burnout this last winter and spring, and working on healing burnout stuff has shifted a lot of things for me personally, but has also just been like, you know what, like, no, I want to read the cozy mystery that's also a paranormal romance. Like I just, that's what I have bandwidth for right now, and I'm gonna read it in 2 days, and I think that there's something really worth celebrating about that. And yeah.
Well, even beyond that, you know what one of my hobbies is, y'all? I like to sit on my porch and do nothing but stare at my neighborhood and drink coffee. Like, and if I don't do that an amount of times a week, I start really slipping as a human. Like, I really can't function. In winter, I had I thought funny Instagram story series that was just me going out, my porch piled with snow, me not wearing a coat, to just angrily stare at my neighborhood with a cup of coffee. But it's still like, that piece is so important for both your creative and spiritual practice, as well as just your practice as a human.
Right. Well, and that gets into this aspect of the Empress that I hadn't thought about until I read it, but the idea of like telling your story, right? Like you have things to say. And that I think is even broader in terms of what is your expression as a human being. Again, what are the things that you love to do? Do you want to be out on your porch staring at your neighborhood? Do you want to watch some terrible, delicious reality television? Like what do you want to? I started getting into Lego again because that brings me joy, and there's no there's no way to monetize it. It's just for me. So that idea of again, the power in knowing who you are and being able to express that and telling your story. I hadn't thought about that until I saw this, and I was like, oh yes, of course, that is part of self-care. That is part of self-expression and pleasure, and being luxurious is having words to say.
Well, and it also gets into the folk witchcraft. It's different types of folk witchcraft, but that Siri and I practice, because so many of those paths and those traditions are largely oracular. And so it's people just passing down stories over time. And yeah, at some point they are folklore, they are myth, they are whatever. But sometimes the moral of the story is like, this really funny thing happened, but don't go near the creek because that's where that bug bit Janet. And so like they're really important for human survival even now. Yeah,
definitely. I think that, like, the other thing that I want to kind of say too, it's gone. Sorry. No.
That's okay.
We are definitely nearing series expiration.
Yes. I also haven't had dinner yet, which is on me, but I'm very hungry. So please forgive my brain fog.
You're totally fine. Again, as you mentioned at the top, like Cassandra, we've been going through it. Like a lot of people are like going through it TM right now. That's why it's like, okay, what is the gentle, peaceful, joyful way to talk with the both of you, to talk about this book? if a thought slips out, that's fine.
Yeah.
We're all still here. There's
Yeah.
plenty of things to talk about. There are cats in the background. I mean, there's exciting things happening.
Sometimes there's a cat in the foreground.
It's true.
Yeah. Oh my God.
But also, again, that power of story. So one of my best friends is a therapist, and she has very much been interested in narrative therapy in recent years because of this idea that, again, we are told these stories about who we are and what we're supposed to be by society, by our families, by social expectations. Again, we even tell ourselves stories about like, because I had that like streak of perfectionism. I always have to be right. People have to think that I'm smart. And about 5 years ago, I was just like, nah. And I just will tell people like, I don't know what that is. And it's so liberating because I don't have to be on top of everything anymore. It doesn't mean I'm less intelligent. It just means I've released that expectation for myself.
Yeah.
So that ability to construct your own new story about yourself and tell that story or reframe these things in a new way that is empowering to you and that is meaningful to you. Again, that is an aspect of the Empress that I had not thought about, that I love. Like very similar to like the devil in Queering the Tarot, just like, oh, I like this a lot better.
Yes. Yeah.
I love to freak clients out when the devil comes up and they look scared and I'm like, ooh, good. And they're like,
exactly.
I'm like, no, bear with me.
Yeah. I think that like one of my favorite thing, I'm in my mid-30s now, so I can't, like this isn't a new revelation, but I love being in my 30s because I feel like I have so much less to prove now. And it's a mindset. It's not that I actually have less to prove. It's the mindset of like, oh, I need to prove that I'm a functioning adult TM that I had through a lot of my 20s. When you know what? Maybe things would have been better if I hadn't been a functioning adult in that moment.
So much of my therapy right now is taken up by dissecting how much better things would have been for me if I had let myself be the age I was.
Yeah.
So no, I get it. I don't have anything to add, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just been really fantastic. And I don't think that I could have written this book at any other stage of my life, really.
Yeah.
Because so much of this book has been about like unraveling shame. For the process for me has unraveled a lot of like shame and self-consciousness and stuff that I think, had I attempted to write this book with Cassandra at a different point in my life, it would have been a very different book because I wouldn't have been able to speak to the same level of like, pleasure is good actually, and everybody deserves it.
Yeah.
Like that, I think this book really comes to the world with.
Yes. Yeah. And again, powerful. Like the Empress, like again, that position of power that the Empress is in, and just fully in their pleasure, like fully expressing themselves. There's no shame, just like, this is who I am. Okay, you like it, fine. You don't, also fine. I'm here, I like it. And that is important. Like again, that affirmation of self.
Well, and that's like what am I trying to say? So the affirmation of self is also I think what I'm trying to say is you can do so much more for the world and even just for your own self, your health, when you're not so worried about being wrong, when you're not so worried about how it's going to look to other people, when you're not so worried about that. I will say, as we talk, I do think in general, I was able to let go of some of my confidence issues, in part because I do think people, when you hit, it used to be 30 and I think now it's 35, I do feel like people just automatically take you more seriously. And so there was like an amount of like, oh, I don't have to, no one's making me try. So I just won't. Not that I don't try for the thing, but like I don't try too hard or what, and so but I do passionately think that it should not have taken me that long. And I do passionately want other people to find that confidence and that sense of self and that embodiment of it that the Empress is so good at so much sooner than I did. Because wow, I have a lot of wasted years worrying about what other people wanted for me.
I feel that in my bones. I'm touching my heart, but it's every cell in my body.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's also, you know, not to say that like, never mind. I was going to say something about how when you're in your 20s, I understand how like it is important to try to figure some things out about like what does it look like to function? How can I, you know, like find a something that supports me like so I can live the life that I need to be living right now. I mean, I think that those are really huge themes of that decade of your life. And so that's not to say like, you know, all people in their 20s should just say fuck it at the same time because that's
But
what I did in my 30s and I'm loving it. You know, I'm not necessarily saying that, but it's also just like, you know, you can show up authentically. You can be who you need to be and you can go through the lessons that you need to go through and it's fine.
Well, I think one of the wildest lessons I learned was that all those times I was so worried about what other people wanted from me, and the tarot tried to tell me this for the record 1,000 times over. All the people that mattered really wanted for me was for me to be happy. And so I thought I was going to get so much pushback about giving up on this dream or not doing this thing anymore. Almost all of the feedback has been, well, good if you weren't happy. And almost all of the feedback has been that, or just like, cool. And then they tell me about their day. Like it's been like in a good way, you know? And so I think you also just realize once you hit that point of being able to feel and stay empowered and embodied with yourself and the things that ground you and make you feel joy. If people do have adverse opinions, you stop caring. So it's like a weird irony that but what you'll find is most people will be happy for you, or you'll discover that most people were so worried about what you thought of them that they didn't even notice you were doing the same thing.
Yeah. I had a therapist once who said, you know, Siri, people are very selfish. I can guarantee you they are not paying as much attention to you as you think they are. And that was just like so liberating because I was like, I need to do everything perfectly because if I don't do everything perfectly, then somebody's going to tell my boss that I'm a bad person and blah, 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 like all of this stuff. No, good Lord, no.
Yeah.
Like, and it was a little harsh. Like that particular therapist was a little blunt at times in a good way, but you know, it should be kind of harsh to be like, no, people don't care about you as much as you think they do. But it was actually very empowering the way that, like, given what I was going through at the time.
Well, of course. I mean, again, like, because I grew up with a ton of expectations about who I was supposed to be and how I was supposed to act, and so carried those with me. And then once I got out into the real world and had relationships with people who actually cared about me authentically, it's like, oh, I don't need to carry any of that stuff anymore. Like I can just be a full expression of who I am, be authentic, have my scattered ADHD or hyperfocus ADHD, and people will be cool with that. Like have all the, all the weird things that I thought that I had to just keep to myself. I mean, now I have a conference. Like there are a whole bunch of cool people out there who want to share weird things with me. Amazing.
That's what I think too. And having people have been so warm and wonderful about my books. And every time I put something out there, I was convinced it was going to fail. And sometimes people will ask me like, well, what drives you when that happens? And the short answer is, I don't know. I guess I felt like if people are going to hate anything I do, why not try some stuff? Like there was almost a freedom in that insecurity. And so like, why not try? But having them be so well received has been like I don't know, just so affirming. And I think being in writers circles, not formal ones, but just like groups of friends who are writers and tarotists, and seeing that people in general are not as scary as we think they are because of the few bad people we've run into. And I think those people that are not great and that are really judgmental take up so much space in our brains. One thing that I think is really sad that has come up a lot for me in therapy, but also just recent conversations with friends, is how many people tried to be there for me and make me see that these were not the influences I should have been listening to, and how much I was not interested in paying attention to them about that. And like we've seen it show up in my romantic life, but certainly my creative and professional life too. And so yeah, I think most people, unless they suck, want other people to succeed and to do well. And that was a weirdly hard lesson to learn. I just did not want to learn it for a long time.
Well, and again, it's hard when you're just not used to that or you don't expect it.
Yeah.
Like I also had to learn that, like, oh, when people actually love you, they only want the best for you. Even when they just like you, they want good things for you. They're not demanding or putting unreasonable demands on your time or your energy or your heart. Like they just want you to be joyful. Like they're people that want to play, like that want to engage
Yeah.
in a meaningful way, like that. Um, that took some learning for me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got about 13 minutes left. I'm gonna pull some questions from chat if you two are cool with that. Great.
I love attendee questions.
Great.
Unless they're hard, then I'll sign off. Just kidding.
You know what? If you want to rage quit the conference, like I will also clip that and then So this question is from Alex. It's probably off topic, but do they have any tips for overcoming magical slumps or slumps in your magical practice? I would even add tarot practice into that too.
Oh, yes.
I feel like Siri just went through this, but I didn't want to put them on blast.
Yes. Yeah. So I recently went through this. I actually magical burnout was a part of the total life burnout that I was referring to earlier. And honestly, the only thing that I could do was not do magic. And that has been really illuminating. I mean, for me, magic is like part of my spiritual practice. It's a really important aspect of my life. And I was in training to be a professional magical practitioner, a professional folk magician. And it looked like doubting myself. It looked like me thinking that my magic wasn't worth anything, that none of this was real, like a whole lot of just like really dark night of the soul kind of stuff. And I just stopped. I just stopped reading any books about magic. I even stopped reading like fantasy books for a while there because it was like even that was too close. Because I would start to like, be in toxic comparison with these like absolutely fictional characters, which is such a sad thing to admit, actually. But so I think it's give yourself permission to just say, okay, don't have to do this anymore. Magic for me has also always been a very practical thing. I don't do it if I don't need it, generally. So, I'm not one to like do magic at every lunation, at every new or full moon. I am not one to do a lot of that stuff. And I think just kind of like leaning into that. And I think that a lot of the advice that we've given today really does mesh. Like if you're not enjoying it, stop doing it. And then when you do come back to your magical practice, do something fun. Like do a short spell, do like, you know, a spell for relationships involving Barbies. I don't know. Do something that's just like very like wacky and different from like what you would normally do. Don't take yourself too seriously, and maybe even stop worrying about results. If you're in a place where you can stop worrying about results, just do it for the fun of it.
I would also say too, I would only add to that, if you're at the total burnout point that Siri was, definitely listen to them and not me, because I have not actually hit that point in an amount of years that would like warrant reliable advice. If it's more of a slump of like a rut, like I would say try literally anything different. There's a lot of brain science that says if you're in any kind of rut, changing even one small thing, if you walk to work going down one block different than what you normally do, can kind of reset your whole day. And so taking that into magical practice, like do things out of order, do things at a time. If you normally do your magic at night or in the morning, try it on your lunch break. Things like that. And if that's still not enough, I think try literally anything different that's probably happening because you're doing the same. So for me, that happens if I'm just doing like candle spell after candle spell, even knowing that like water is my main element that I use. And so then I'm like, oh, okay, I'm bored, which means the magic is bored. So it's time to just do these sprays, or it's time to pull some of my plants in from the garden to work with that, so just try literally anything different. Look up glamour spells online, just anything. Yeah, maybe even Google. I've never done this, it might be terrible, but maybe even Google just like offbeat magic or quirky magic, or just see if something cool pops up.
I love it.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, especially with tarot, like for me, getting like reading a new book, for example, can give me a new perspective on the cards, can get me interested in working with tarot in a different way, or working with a deck that I haven't worked with in a while. So I have some decks that I haven't worked with in years at this point, probably because like I just have moved on. And so reconnecting with some of those might also be a way of getting out of a tarot slump. And the other thing for both magic and tarot, like drop any and every expectation. Like it was truly, I did not realize how like much pressure I'd been putting on myself around my tarot practice when I realized, oh my God, people are just pulling a single card a day and calling that a tarot reading. I could do that. I don't have to pull a full Celtic cross spread and do an entire like within the witch's pentagram on a full moon. Like I can just do this, you mean? So like really like dropping a lot of those expectations of perfection and stuff like that is really important too.
I want to add one quick thing, and then I want to make sure we have time to answer multiple people's questions. But I will say for tarot specifically, one of my best tips for breaking sort of a rut is, if you can afford it or if you have friends who do it, getting a reading, and it does not have to be a tarot reading, getting a reading from someone else, not about this topic. It could be about literally anything. And what I would suggest if it is tarot is try not to look at the cards, just focus on what the other person is telling you, and see how that kind of shifts your perspective on it moving forward.
Great. I love that. I also just love like releasing expectations in general is just a good general life advice thing. It's a lot more peaceful. Okay, so we have a question from Shell. What is the weirdest question a client has ever asked in a reading? Again, as much as you can say.
The most intense question I've ever been asked is, I maybe shouldn't say this, it comes with a pretty significant content warning, but the person was just so casual about a very heavy topic that I was thrown. That like something really traumatic happened to them and they were just like, oh yeah, I just want to know who blanked me. And I was like, and they just said it like they were asking, oh yeah, I just want to know how tomorrow's gonna go. Like I was like, so I was really thrown by that. I love weird questions though. I love very in-depth, like spiritual whatever. If you come to me and you're like, I think my grandma is talking to me through this bird outside my window, I'm like, great, let's explore that. So I don't know that I really have a bar for weird that is relatable.
Yeah, I feel like it's easier for me to go to like what is the most inappropriate questions I've ever been asked than like what is the weirdest. I'm like totally drawing a blank. The most inappropriate question I've probably ever been asked was when my dad wanted to get a reading for the first time ever. And so first of all, I'll say like I was on the fence about doing this reading anyway, because like it's hard to read for people that you're really close with. And they're, you know, you need some energetic boundaries, etc. My dad sits down in front of me and is like, so when am I gonna die? And I'm just like, I am not doing that reading for you, sir. Like, I'm just not doing it. Yeah. So that's probably like the one that's really coming to mind right now. I'm sure that I'll remember one where like, oh yeah, so I was reading at a shop, and somebody walked in who sat down in front of me and was like, I don't know if you can see them, you're psychic. And I was like, oh, okay, see what? And they were like, well, I have wings and they hurt. Can you tell me how and why? I was like, okay, this is all right. So I did a reading and the cards were, you know, very much like all about like grounding and stuff like that. And I was like, this, you know, this person clearly is like going through some stuff, and, you know, I'm not an absolute asshole, so I'm not saying this to make fun of them or anything. They were clearly going through some mental health stuff. But that was probably one of the ones that I was the most thrown by. And the cards really came through with like, honestly, some good advice about like grounding and, you know, like getting help when you need it and stuff like that. So like I was still willing to take I'm glad I took the question.
Amazing. And again, the cards answer in the way that people need to hear it. Like those are my favorite questions, are when people come in and they ask a question and the tarot's like, actually, this is the answer you need right now. You don't think this is the question you should be asking, but I'm telling you this because we want to take care of you, make sure you're okay.
When you're reading for lots of people, that can be so frustrating though. Like I've had people come in and the cards tell them there are so many places that you're not showing up at work the way you need to. You're in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of credit card debt, blah, blah, blah. And I'll give them these really important, like life changing advice. And then they'll be like, it doesn't say anything about my love life. And I'm like,
why is it always the love life too?
And like, I actually love doing reading. I am a romantic. I actually love doing reading, like genuine readings about how to best navigate love and sex and dating.
Yes. But it's always those like, you know, I don't know, maybe it's like a smoke screen. Like I am willing to talk about my love life with you, but not about my quote unquote like actual problems.
Yeah.
Or whatever, which is always really frustrating.
Yeah.
That definitely, because again, with the cards, at least my relationship with the cards, where it's like, this is not the question. Like, especially with friends, and they're asking the same question over and over again, my cards get very sassy. And it's like, no, you know better. We're going to tell you what you actually need to hear right now. We're done being gentle.
Yeah. And mine, yeah. Well, and for me, I think I will talk to them. I'll find a way to word it to the cards, whatever I need to do. If someone asks me about their love life, even if the cards are like, that's not what they need to hear, I'm like, okay, but that's what they're willing to hear. And so, and that's what they want to hear. Like that's the job they're paying me to do. And so I want to be able to do it. It is what drives me nuts is the people who sit down and say, oh yeah, I just want to know what the cards think I need to know right now, or what the most important information from the cards is. And then I give them the most important information. And then they're like, oh, it didn't say anything about my love life. When am I going to meet someone? And I was like, why didn't you just ask me that? Like,
that's allowed. You can ask me that.
Exactly. Yes. Amazing. There's one, let me just double check. Yeah, one last question. And this is from Kai, and it's mostly for Siri. And again, if you don't want to answer it, we don't have to. We could take that offline. But how do you go about finding Norse information and material that isn't just straight up neo-Nazi propaganda? I embellished their question a little bit, but
I mean, yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down. The thing that, here's the thing, and I was ranting about this recently in an interview that's coming out next week on the podcast. Like, it's really easy to say statements like Black Lives Matter and have that not be a huge deal, right? Like, I think that with heathenry, especially because of the history of everything, it's important to seek out people who will say something like that unequivocally, like, because it just is true, right?
well, and if they won't even say that, then like,
right, then like
that's your flag, like.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, like, a lot of people really put their foots in their mouths online. When I started, I was like, okay, well, I'm only going to learn from women. And then after a while, I actually learned that one of the books that I was referencing a lot and that had a huge impact on me was written by a TERF. And so I was like, okay, well, great. That what I thought was a very simple rule is not a very simple rule. So, like, I have a huge list of anti-racist heathen resources on my website, which is northernlightswitch.com. I have a lot of great guests on the podcast, not all of whom are heathen, but that's a great place to look as well. Some resources that I really love, my personal teacher, Kari Toring, is absolutely incredible. You can get her like online classes through the Need Fire Candle Co. Yes, thanks, Cassandra. You can get her online classes through Need Fire Candles. And I teach sometimes, occasionally, on Norse stuff, so follow me. I also try to lift up other teachers as much as possible. So even if I'm not teaching, I'll be, sharing resources of people that I know are either like, anti-racist, who are, radical, and accepting and queer and all of that stuff. The internet is a lovely place because you can both find where people have totally, showed their true colors in the worst ways. And you can also find people who are doing incredible work who maybe aren't getting like traditional book deals and stuff like that. So a lot of heathens will use the hashtag like inclusive heathenry, hashtag inclusive heathenry. The Troth, TROTH, is an international organization that is committed to like inclusive heathenry and anti-racism and stuff like that. So you can even find groups through them. I think that they have like a networking like aspect of their organization too. So there are a ton of resources. But I'll put my website in the chat. Yes, Siri Pluff, JK. But Absolutely. My website is northernlightswitch.com, and then my podcast website is heathensjourneypod.com. I'm working on getting all of the old transcripts up now that I finally have transcription software. That's going to be a while because we're in the middle of book launch, so you know.
I want to add too before we close, it is easy to point, and this is not a read on Kai at all. Like, this is Siri has gotten asked this in almost every interview that we've done, but like, it's very easy to point fingers at heathenry because there are very loud white supremacists within that culture. That does not excuse the rest of us from examining our craft and looking at what is appropriation and what is appreciation. And spoiler alert, more of it is going to be appropriation than you're going to want to admit. But I also think some red flags to look for, yes, in Norse and in heathenry, but I have seen this reading about Irish, Welsh, Scottish witchcraft, as well as general Wicca that we all read. Anything that speaks a lot to blood ancestry in a way that, like, if you have like a weird gut feeling, like, run, with the exception of if it is a marginalized people writing it, because they have their protective reasons for that. So if it is white people saying that in any faith within these broader spiritual faiths, run the other way. I would also say we have excused a lot of anti-Semitism in tarot in particular up until very, very recently. And so I think educating ourselves about that is really important. Yes, there are loud, vocal Norse white supremacists. There is stuff everywhere else in all of these other pockets that feeds that and allows it to get to that point. And a lot of it is we are all responsible, especially white people, for going back and cutting it off at the top as best we can.
Oh, another kind of dog whistle, and this is more so in terms of queer stuff, but well, this isn't even a dog whistle, this is very explicit, but anybody who talks like really explicitly about womb magic is very likely to be a TERF, or straight up like racist, like homophobic, like you name it, right? Like a lot of, yeah. So, and you'll find a lot of that though, in texts of a certain era. I think there was an era of witchcraft where, like, you know, womb stuff, TM, was very important. But if it is gender exclusionary in the way that they talk about it, that is another big, like,
yeah,
I would stay away from this.
And what you will find is if someone is a TERF, they're probably also racist. They're probably also, if someone is racist, they're probably also a TERF. Like, the very often the Venn diagram is a circle, and it just takes a while for all of those colors to show.
Yeah. That is an incredible point, and a very good point, because it's just like one of those threads you start tugging at and the rest of it unravels. And it's like, okay, cool. Your lizard people conspiracy is just coded anti-Semitism. Cool. Great. Yeah. Cool. Yes. Amazing. We are over. You've both been incredibly generous. We are over time. I, again, could easily talk to both of you for a long time, but I want you to eat and sleep and pet your cats and do all the other wonderful things. So yeah, if there's any last things that you want to promote before I let you off into the night.
Well, buy Lessons from the Empress wherever you buy books. Yes. Please also buy my other books if you haven't. Leave them all 5-star reviews wherever you can do that, even at the big places we try not to buy from. Those reviews still help a lot. You don't actually have to get them there to leave us a review there. And so that's a nice way to cheat that system. And then So that being said, we are totally understanding of people's financial stuff. If that is the place that makes the most sense and is best for you, like we're not going to judge you for getting, like it's on sale there. So
Yeah.
That being said, Siri put there, so I'll just put that. My website is cassandra-snow.com. I am actually open for readings right now, which feels nuts during a book tour, but I have to pay bills. And so, and then on top of that, the best hub for book stuff, for whatever, is going to be mix.cassandra.snow on Instagram. That's mx.cassandra.snow. And then if you want to support all of the constant writing I am doing, patreon.com/Cassandra Snow. Yes.
Yeah, so my Instagram is just my name, siri.vincent.prof. It's the dots for me, not any of those underlines or other things. I do have a lot of impersonators right now. Don't tell me if I have another new one, by the way. Please don't. I don't need to know. And also, I am also on Patreon, and that is mostly for the Heathen's Journey podcast. So that is at patreon.com/Heathen's Journey Pod, which I've put in the links as well.
Perfect. And we're going to put that in the YouTube chat as well, so people can find you both.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. This was great. Thank you so much, the other people who are here doing tech stuff. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, of course. And again, thank you both so much for coming on and talking about the book and talking about all sorts of other stuff. This was a delight. Thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Bye.